Let's now cover user input, or the ability to send data from a web page back to your server to be processed. So we're going to be building a form, and we're going to examine get and post, both get and post data types. Well, not data types, ways of submitting data through an HTTP request. And we'll look at the differences between them, when we should and shouldn't use them. And we'll create a form to submit a name to another page to be processed using either get or post. So this is going to be a very basic example, but it'll set you up to be able to post whatever data that you want to your server. So the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and actually build a form. So let's go ahead and construct a form. Now what I'm doing here is I'm giving this form an action and a method, and we'll cover them in just a moment. So what we're now going to do is create an input field with a type of text, and we're going to give this a name. Now this name is extremely important because this allows us to pick up the name that you give here in PHP. So I'm going to call this let's call this just name. So that's how we're going to pick this up. I'm also going to have an input with a type of submit, and this is going to allow us to actually submit this data. Okay, so let's preview this form in our browser. You can see that we just have an input field here and a submit button. At the moment, when we click this, what it's actually doing is, because we've not defined a method or an action, it's submitting to the current page with the method get. And we can see this in the URL here. You can see there's this name key here with no data. If I was to type in a full name here and click submit, you can see that we've got the value Alex Garrett with a plus for a space. So this is this has been set as a get request. So basically this has been sent in the URL of the HTTP request rather than the body. Now the body would be the method of post. Now it's still available to the server, but it's just been sent in the body of the request rather than the URL. So if I again type Alex Garrett and click submit, that data is now available to us in PHP. It's still been sent with the HTTP request. If we check our network tab and we go ahead and enter Alex Garrett and click submit, you can see that we get this here. If we go ahead and click on this and go under headers, you can see that we have form data just here and name Alex Garrett. So we can see that this data has still been submitted. Let's just change this back to get actually and take a look at the network tab again. So I've confirmed, hit, yeah. So we've resubmitted. If we click on this, you can see now that you've got query string parameters rather than the actual data. So we've got a query string parameter here. Name is the key, Alex Garrett is the value. So when should we use get and when should we use post? Well, generally, get should not be used to, for example, insert a record into a database or do anything like that. It should purely be as almost like a getter. So I might want to say, well, I want to be on page 2, so I might want to have a page that looks something like this, page equals 2, and that might select page 2 of the results from a particular database set or something like that. So generally we would do that, but let's take a look at actually how we actually pick this up in PHP, and we'll use printr on get and post super globals just so we can see how this data has been transferred. So let's create a new file rather than submitting this to this one. We could of course do everything up here. In actual fact, that might make a little bit more sense. So we're submitting to action, we're submitting the action as nothing. We could of course just put index.php in here. This could be a completely another file. It really doesn't matter where we're submitting to. This data is still going to be available to us because it's been sent with the HTTP request. Well, in this case, I'm just going to choose index.php, and inside of here, I'm going to say printr $_get, and that's it. And this looks a little odd. It's just the super global notation in PHP. You'll see others like request. In actual fact, we could have printr and request as well. So if we were to say Alex Garrett and click submit, you can see that we've now got name Alex Garrett. Now we don't really tend to use request. Instead, we want to specifically define which method we want to pick the data up from. So when I click on that, we get exactly the same result back, but then again, we won't get post data back here. So if we change this to post, get will be empty, but instead we can use post, and this will be exactly the same thing. And we'll see now that this actually comes through as the name as the key and Alex Garrett as the value, but we haven't got this in the URL as we've already seen in the network tab. So what do we actually do with this data? How can we actually do something with this data? Well, the first thing that we really need to do is check if this data is actually available to us or not. And we can use the isSet construct in PHP. So we're going to create a little if statement, and we're going to say if isSet $_post name, then we can go ahead and actually do something with it. So if I was to go ahead and echo OK here, when we initially land on this page, remember we saw the sort of empty array notation up there a moment ago. Now we see nothing because this hasn't been set. It's not being sent to our page, so we don't have access to it. When I go ahead and click submit now, it says OK because that data has actually been set and sent. And we can of course do this with multiple values. So we could choose name and age. Let's just put some placeholders in here. Okay, so we can actually do this with multiple items. So if we look at this, we've got name and age here. I want to go ahead and check if name and age is set, so I can comma separate what I pass through to is set, and I can say if name and age is available, name and age are available. And what I can then do is refresh and go ahead and type in a name and just type in any age into here and click submit. It says name and age are available. So in this case, what I can actually do is I could say something like name equals $_post name, because I know that that exists now, and I can just duplicate this down and do exactly the same thing for the age, and then I can down here echo out you are X and you are Y years old, and then I can go ahead and just replace these in with complex syntax, name and age, and that's it. So now what we see is Alex Garrett 24, click submit, and it tells us our name and our age. Now just as a side note here, and as a little warning, what we're actually doing here is we are not really sanitizing any of this data that we get through. Now in this case it's only an example, it doesn't really matter too much, but generally speaking this data could be harmful, and I'll just demonstrate this very quickly. If I go ahead and type some open and close script tags here, and I alert perhaps just the number 1, and I type in my age, when I hit submit here, you'll see if we inspect this that we have this script here with potential data inside of it. So let's just do this here, and you can see that we've got basically in terms of XSS attacks, in this case we see that we have a XSS order to refuse to execute script because its source was found within the request, the order to send. So we've got a sort of XSS protection built in here, but generally we want to go ahead and protect against this now. So you need to be really careful when you're outputting data, and we rectify this with the HTML entities function. And generally what we'll do is we'll provide or wrap the string that we're outputting in HTML entities. We will then specify something like end quotes, and then we'll also explicitly define the character encoding, so UTF-8. Now in this case what's going to happen is, if we do this for name and age, in fact we'll just do it for name just for demonstration purposes and we can get back on track, you'll see that we have, if we just type in the same as we did before, you can see that this is like literally output, and that's because we're outputting the entity equivalent. So here you can see that this is converted to entities. So anyway, that's basically, now we have the ability to post data through. We could of course cast this to an int if we were concerned about security as well, because we know that this needs to be a number. So what we've done here is we've looked at posting data using or defining an action in our HTML form and sending this back to our page, checking and then outputting data onto onto our page. So this is how we submit form data in PHP. Now, why would we not want to use get in some circumstances and want to use post in other circumstances? Well, one thing is that post will handle a lot more data than a get request will, simply because it's sent in the request body. So for example, if you were asking an admin to add an article to a page, or an author to add an article to a page, you obviously wouldn't send their whole article in a get request. You would send it in a post request, because it allows for more data to be sent via the form and via the HTTP request. So that's how we use get and post in PHP, and a couple of little security considerations as well.